So many questions and so little time. What's up everyone, Evgeny Genchev here, and this is Sweet Struggle. Today's video is a special one because we're celebrating the 10,000 subscriber milestone. And I thought, what better way to do this than taking some time and responding to all your questions. You know, getting to know each other a little bit better and taking the relationship to the next level. Thanks to everyone for submitting their questions both on here and on Instagram. Now, there are quite a few questions on here, so let's get to it. Lots of people have asked me this, and it's something that is worth discussing. From my experience, having a perfect pitch is very useful, but I would say that it's not an absolute necessity for you to be a top pianist or musician in general. It's a very useful tool to have, but it shouldn't be seen as a requirement for you to achieve your goal. Don't set limitations to yourself just because you don't have something that someone else has. Fundamentally, the most important thing that I found for myself, and I actually discussed this in more length with Iyad Soger in the last podcast that we did last week, that it's important that you identify what your strengths are and amplify this, and then also identify your weaknesses and develop in this so that you can be a well-rounded musician. The most important thing is not to limit yourself by what you're lacking, but rather work on yourself and develop to get the best that you can be. Plus, perfect pitch is something that even if you don't have it, you can actually learn it yourself. You can educate your ear to develop some form of perfect pitch. So if you really want it and you want to have that tool in your toolbox, which is always a plus, then you can definitely do this. There are ways to do this. I'm not going to discuss it here, but definitely go after it. And if you feel that this is going to unleash even further potential from yours, then you should go for it. But please don't put any brakes on you just because you perceive something that you have or you don't have as a limitation, but rather try to expand yourself than block yourself from development. All right, before this turns into a TED talk, we should move on to the next one. I've discussed this in few of my videos, but let me give you the concise version. When you're unmotivated or you're stuck in a rut, it's worth reminding yourself, what are your long-term goals? What is your vision for yourself? If listening to recordings, watching videos, going in nature or reading books is something that helps you, then you should also utilize this. If you need to take a couple of days off, that's also fine, as long as you don't have any deadlines that you need to chase. And also don't make the cheeky excuse that every week you're unmotivated so that you start losing consistency. Over the years, there have been many recordings and videos that have helped me to keep consistent and motivate me. This by no means is limited to just pianists, but also other musicians, singers, and even different professions. This actually links very well with the previous question. I'm not your conventional sports fan. I don't normally have a particular team that I support, but I do watch a lot of basketball, which is a bit strange because I actually never played basketball, but I'll tell you how that started. One day I got really curious about Michael Jordan, and I wanted to research on him and also watch highlights of how he used to play. I thought that his flow and efficiency of the way he played the game was amazing, even to someone who at the time had no clue about basketball. It really amazed me how he stood out, his vision, his intensity of playing, and I found it really motivating. So actually since then I've been following quite a lot the NBA. I've been brought up with football back home, but actually this is something that I enjoy more playing rather than watching. I do like to also play and watch volleyball, but these are all stuff that I rarely get to do. There are just 24 hours in a day. So I guess you can call it more of a fascination and appreciation for the craftsmanship rather than being a fan of a particular club or following religiously a particular sport. 100%. This is something that you develop more and more over the years. It has happened a couple of times with a bit more simple pieces that I've actually learned them on the plane or on the train on the way to a concert, just by looking at the music and imagining how it would sound, imagining how it would feel. And this is something that you develop over time. From what I remember, I think the most that I have had to have in my hands and in my brain at once was something like 3 recital programs and 3 concertos. And these 3 full recitals of about 80 minutes roughly. Actually, I have already made a video discussing how to combine the practicing of new and old repertoire and among other things into your daily routine. So you can watch this in the linked video. But in order to keep a larger repertoire, you need to make sure that also you keep playing through the pieces. You may not need to practice them all if you already have learned them. A trick that you can use is just play through them at the end of the day, just to keep them in your fingers in a nice mid-tempo, in a methodical manner, which you can have so that you keep it in a good condition rather than deteriorating the piece or forgetting it. But this is one of the tricks. There are thousands of pieces that you can play, and what would be more fitting for you, I wouldn't want to say anything in particular, because there is no one size fits them all. Scales, arpeggios, technical exercises, sight reading are definitely things that you need to incorporate into your daily practice. I've made lots of videos on those, so make sure to check out the Sweet Struggle playlist and you'll find them on there. It's awesome that you're pursuing the musical path as a composer, so congrats for that. I would say the most important thing is to stay grounded, to take as much as you can from the environment, to meet as many people as you can, obviously get from the education all that you can get. And why I say that it's important to be grounded is because there'll be lots of people you will compare yourself to, you will be compared to as well. Try not to get into the destructive path of, running yourself to the ground because you don't have this or you don't have that, but rather identifying who you are and making the most out of it. We discussed this with Ian last week in great length in the podcast that I published. So if you're curious about our stories and our experiences from music college years, then check out the podcast. When growing up, actually, most of the pieces that I was learning were above my skill level. But it was a constant challenge and I had to really up my game in order to be able to master all of them. It is not something that I would recommend to do consistently, because then if it's not done methodically, you might leave some holes in your technique or in your musicality that you don't sufficiently develop. If it is done with the proper supervision though, it can be very useful and it can be very motivating. Actually, I made a video where I shared the story of how I learned Rachmaninoff's third piano concerto in just 2 months, and I shared the steps that I did it with. And these are very simple and you can apply them to any piece, so make sure you check it out. This is not generally a very nice thing of your teacher to say, and I hope she actually prescribed particular steps that can be done towards it. But from my perspective, there are many aspects that play a role when you're talking about musicality, when you're talking about artistry. There is a list that is quite entertaining and quite interesting to read through of the pianist and composer Busoni. He made a list of all the necessary things from a musical, from a technical, and from a life experience point of view that are necessary for anybody to become a great artist. It's incredible how much he goes into the detail of it, and he says something like, oh, you need to be aware of art, you need to be aware of poetry and this and this and this, and if you have He goes into this huge list of things that you need to have done or you need to do. And after listing all these things, he says that even if one of these points is lacking, it will be obvious and audible in every note that you play. I wouldn't go that far, but it's definitely something worth pursuing. This was done about a century ago, but let's say that in modern day, what is perceived as musicality can be benefited by you having a better knowledge of the harmony, of the progressions of music analysis, also knowledge of the composers, the pieces, some background on all the story and historical environment in which all these things happen, the events around the compositions that you play. Learn how compositions were perceived by the contemporaries of the composers, and then try to amplify all these elements. Listen to all the new recordings of great performances of classical works, and try to get inspired by them and to identify what makes them great. I hope that helps and sets you on a path of exploration and further development in your musicality. It's always a great idea to have an acoustic instrument as long as you can afford it, and also your neighbors can tolerate it. I actually have a video where I discuss the difficulties and the ways to deal with neighbors when having an acoustic instrument, so make sure to check it out. I get this asked a lot, and I would say that the best thing that you can do for yourself is really find professional guidance. I realize that this goes against the whole concept of learning by yourself or learning through an app and all these magical solutions that people try to sell you these days. But I give you this example. When I was in high school, for a few months I didn't have any teacher. I got absolutely no guidance from anyone, and it was some of the most frustrating and depressing experiences that I've had. It felt a little bit like I'm going in a circle and I'm not quite utilizing my time in the best possible way, although I was working a lot. So to avoid rediscovering the hot water, I would recommend it at least once in a while to get a professional consultation with someone who can navigate you in and point you at the right direction, and then you can continue with your process in your own time. In general, if you wish to continue learning on your own, it is really essential and imperative that you go through a lot of self-criticism. You need to be your toughest critic. You need to observe yourself, analyze yourself, and then try to find ways to better yourself. That works well if you already have sufficient experience with the instrument and you have studied with someone in the past. But this period of my life was one of the strongest triggers for me to actually start this channel, because I wanted to provide knowledge, I wanted to provide value for people who are feeling stuck and they don't know what is the right thing to do, what is the right way to approach certain problems. And that's how it all started. So I hope on here certain aspects of playing and learning the piano and music in general can be found useful by you and many others. I enjoy reading, I enjoy doing yoga and going to the gym. And these are actually things that I try to incorporate into my everyday life. I wake up with yoga, I go in the evenings to the gym, and in the breaks I try to always read something. This is actually a familiar problem, and it happens to me occasionally, luckily not all the time, but I get one of the worst cases, which in my experience is cold, sweaty, and sticky fingers. Yeah, it's not great. What helps me is washing hands, having maybe, if you need, a hand warmer, and bringing a handkerchief to the stage. That won't help you during the performance, but in any breaks you should be definitely utilizing it. Don't overdo it, however, because that can get annoying for the audience. So use it as much as it's necessary, but don't overindulge. You would memorize it the way you memorize any other piece, which is through repetition. One way to go about it. You can analyze the harmonic structure, the different patterns. They can be photo, motor memory, oral memory, and actually depending on how much time you have, what kind of a piece it is, and you can apply different other aspects to it. There are many ways, and I actually discuss them and do them in practice when I was doing the Chopin minute waltz that I learned in under an hour. You can find the video on my channel, and there is also the full version, which is about, I think, 1 hour 40 minutes or something like that, of me learning it and also answering to all the questions about the process on my Patreon page. So if you sign up on there, you can get access to the full video. I promise that I do try to respond to everybody, but I do get quite a lot of messages, and there are only 24 hours in a day. There needs to be the daily practice, there needs to be filming a video, editing, all this process. It's time consuming, so I don't get as much time, unfortunately, to talk with all of you guys. So I do try to allocate some time for it, but I cannot respond to everybody immediately, unfortunately. I do try to respond, though, to as many of you as I can. You can practice the left hand passages the same way you practice the right hand passages, just double the time. Over the years, you develop a bond, you develop a connection with your instrument, with music in general. It becomes an integral part of who you are, and at some point you start seeing this as, part of you. Then after a while you want to, share that experience with other people. For me, one of the turning points was when I was performing at a music festival at Ohrid in Macedonia. There I really felt that this is something that I should pursue, and this is something that I felt the urge to do. I don't generally have things that I do or I consume to spoil myself. I'm not really someone who is much into this, but I guess once or twice a year there is a bit of a guilty pleasure which I find in having a nice carrot cake. That I cannot refuse. At the time that I was learning it, which was like 13, 14 years old, it was quite a big of a struggle, and I think it took something around 2 months. I remember the frustrations that I was going through, but then methodically, step by step, I could feel that, all right, this is starting to evolve, and certain plays just need a certain amount of repetition. And after which you feel much more comfortable, as much as that's possible in La Campanella. But that's not a compass for anything. If you're more advanced than I was back then you can learn it also in a week and perform it. But it also can take up to half a year or something like that. So it's really very individual, so I wouldn't give that as a recipe of what to expect. I hope that you're practicing every day your piano, especially if you're serious about it or you have some appreciation for it. Let's make an analogy with playing any music instrument with sports. If you are serious about any sports, not necessarily even professional, but you want to keep in shape, or you are regularly practicing a particular sport and you have certain goals that you want to achieve, then you need to be pretty consistent about it. Also, this sport would have a reflection on every other aspect of life: how you eat, how you sleep, how you drink, pretty much everything. That's why often people say that musicians are like athletes of the small muscles. I have tried and it was definitely an amazing experience. I really enjoyed the sheer power that you can get out of the organ and the different colors and register that you can hear from it. The organ that I most recently played was in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, and that was a bit of a struggle because the tuning of the organ was a semitone lower. I would play a C and I would hear a B, and with my hearing with the perfect pitch, that was quite challenging because you end up continuously trying to transpose the piece so that it would sound right, and it never does. Oh, I've experienced so many, sometimes on a daily basis, sometimes few times a day. There's been so many blows that you just need to endure. The most important thing is to keep moving forward. Fundamentally, my view on this has been that you shouldn't rely on external help or external factors to help you in setbacks, but it's all in the mindset that yes, this is the situation, and what do you do with it, and how do you get yourself out of it. This, I think, has evolved in me through playing music, because if you think about how we prepare for recitals, and if you're the one appearing on stage, if you are the one who is going to perform, it's not dependent on someone else how you play that day. It's all on you. Whether it's a good day for you, whether you're prepared or not, it's all on you. So it is a way of responsibility, or rather the ability to respond to what's happening to you and what are the circumstances that makes you deal with a healthy and more proactive attitude with setbacks or with any other situation. You're very kind and I really appreciate it. I'm happy that the things that I put out have inspired you. Regarding how I keep myself being productive in my practice, essentially it's about keeping myself accountable. We often tend to play rather than practice, and we also not consciously even let mistakes come into the practice. If you keep yourself accountable and you keep yourself with a strict mindset on every single note and every single passage that you practice, then you're going to have a more productive practice. Obviously, there are many elements that go into it, but this is the fundamental aspect, that you have to keep that standard so that you can utilize the time to its fullest potential. The rest of the tools we can discuss in further videos on this channel. The fourth finger is probably the weakest and most dependent of them all, because the way it is linked to the other fingers. There are different exercises that you can do that you should be doing regularly, but make sure that whatever you're doing it in a very methodical and relaxed way, because you can bring yourself lots of injury. Having the third finger stick out is definitely not a good sign, and you should try to observe what triggers it and release any of this tension as soon as possible. If you need to leave a sign to remind you all the time to pay attention to this, do this. If you need to put a reminder on your phone, do that. Discuss it with your teacher if you cannot identify it properly, but make sure you look after it as soon as possible, because that's tension that you don't want there, 100%. What I love about playing the piano is that it's such a universal instrument. You can play anything on it. You can be the orchestra, you can be a violin, you can be a cello, you can be a bassoon, you can be someone whispering, you can be a narrative, you can be a song, you can be anything that you want. Some of the most beautiful music is written for the piano. It has an endless repertoire of amazing pieces that you can pick from. It's just, yeah, quite incredible. In the past, I've done quite a few things that could have been a potential path of development. I was doing really well with Kyokushinkai karate. I stopped that because obviously of the piano. I used to play a lot of table tennis, and it was something of a passion of mine. I even won a city championship for my age group when I was still in high school. So it would have been something sport related, most probably, or something technology related, because this is something that I also have had the knack for. You're very sweet to say this, and I really appreciate that you enjoy the things that I put out. What my aim is when doing anything is to do it with full involvement, whether it's playing the piano, whether it's composing, arranging, performing, producing videos, or working out, or whatever it is. Whatever I've been doing, I always try to apply myself fully and to make the most out of it. Now, why would I share with you $1 million idea? But jokes aside, if there would have to be a fourth pedal that does something that is helpful, I would probably put a pedal which covers you up whenever you have a memory lapse in front of the audience. So it plays on the music while you find yourself. It would save a lot of heart attacks on stage. Let me know if you can produce that, and maybe we can arrange something. Absolutely, and I've actually listed quite a few words that I would like to include in it, but it's about finding the time, logistics, and also finding the right partner for it. I wouldn't say I have a favorite piece per se, but there's certain pieces that I love closing the recital with as an encore. One of them is Tchaikovsky's October from the Seasons, and I really love closing with it, and maybe indulging with it a little bit too much, but at the end of a recital, that's, I hope, okay. Actually, I was almost 9 years old by the time I started playing the piano, so this was considered as a late starter, because most people start when they're 3 or 4 years old. Let's just say that I gave them 5 years of head start. They're both amazing, both incredible individuals who have shaped the music world that we know today. Music history and music repertoire without any of them would definitely not be the same. And depending on your taste, you may have a preference towards one or the other, but they are monumental, both in their own right. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching, and thank you all for the beautiful questions. I hope they've given you a new perspective. I hope there are things that you can apply to your own life, to your own music development. Most of all, I would like to thank to everybody who has subscribed to the channel and has supported me on this journey. If you would like to also join the community on Patreon and support me even further, that would be amazing. But meanwhile, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and smash that subscribe button if you haven't already. Also click that bell icon so that you never miss an upload. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.